I'm going to introduce you guys from up here because it seems weird to introduce you, sit next to you. Okay. So this is kind of for Horrorstör, but this is more because I really have a huge amount of respect for the people who are here tonight. There's a weird sort of northeastern horror literary scene, and it's like where the smart horror people are. And so I wanted these guys to come out because also if you write horror at all, and they've all been doing this way longer than I have, they know that the question you get asked more than anything is what scares you. And you're like, oh no, the same things that scare you. But we wanted to talk tonight because frankly, when you get right down to it, you know, from the moment you wake up in the morning and start brushing your teeth with some kind of carcinogenic toothpaste to the time you get on the subway driven by a drunk conductor and avoid being pushed off the platform, till the time you get home at night and maybe not die in your sleep, everything is terrifying. Everything in life. And so some of these guys tonight are going to be reading things by authors who scare them. Some of them are going to be reading passages from books by them or people who are not them that they find terrifying. Others are going to be talking about what scares them in real life and the horrors of reality. So starting over here, the first person sitting right here is Ellen Datlow, who is probably no editor has had as big of an influence on a genre as she has. For 30 years, she's been editing horror and science fiction and fantasy. She was the original fiction editor for Omni magazine, if people remember Omni, which was like wildly influential in the 80s. She's published more anthologies than there are people in this room. She's won 4 Hugo Awards, 3 Bram Stoker Awards, 9 World Fantasy Awards, 2 Shirley Jackson Awards, 5 Locus Awards. She is absolutely incredible, and probably if this room burned down, she'd be the one survivor, and this literature would be okay. So please welcome Ellen.
Are you going to introduce all of us?
Yeah, I'll introduce all of you. Sitting next to her is John Langan, who I think first published in 2008?
2001.
2001, oops. And while he's not as important as Ellen or as amazing,
Obviously, he's detached.
but John quickly got a reputation as sort of the smartest guy in the room in terms of horror. He's published several collections. His first novel, which is called House of Windows, is back there for sale, which is sort of a deconstructed, unreconstructed, anti-constructed haunted house book. It's a complicated book that no one understands, but it's woman. But John is also as important because of the essays and articles and interviews he gives. He's someone who really has a deep understanding of horror literature and Gothic literature and what this stuff all means and represents. So please give a big hand to John Langan. Sitting next to John is actually 2 people. One is J.T. Leroy, J.T. Petty, who has been billed at this event several times accidentally as J.T. Leroy. So if anyone is here to see J.T. Leroy, he's not here.
Disappointed again.
Although J.T. Leroy did get in touch with us and asked why he was going to be at this event. But J.T. Petty is a filmmaker, a video game designer and writer. He has also written comics. His latest book is a graphic novel called The Rise of Aurora West, which he wrote with Paul Park, which is an amazing all-ages book about a girl with a jetpack who punches monsters. And he's also the director of movies. He's directed an amazing movie called The Burrowers, which is probably the definitive horror western. But he's also the director of Mimic 3, Sentinel, and Soft for Digging, which played the Sundance Film Festival in 2002.
2001.
What
is it about 2001?
And he also was one of the people who wrote the Walking Dead video game, which was widely acclaimed and a lot of fun, the second one. So he is also tonight Sarah Langan, who is his wife, who is a horror writer, who is not able to be with us this evening. It is a last minute thing. But Sarah is an author who has won a lot of awards. I didn't really have a bio ready for her because she wasn't going to be here. But her book, Audrey's Door, is on sale tonight. And it's kind of hard to find these days. And it's one of the great modern haunted house books. I mean, it's not a deconstructed thing or anything, but it really takes a traditional horror house book and drags it up into the modern time. It's an amazing book. They have it here, and you're not going to find it almost anywhere else except online. So why not buy it in a real bookstore? JT is going to be representing Sarah and himself tonight. And then last but not least is Laird Barron. Laird is basically a genre unto himself. He writes some of the bleakest, nastiest, most just absolutely depressing horror fiction out there. And he's also, he's written 3 short story collections, two novels, and is just a huge towering, you can tell he's towering right down there, figure in horror. And also, you may know him because Nick Pizzolatto, who did True Detective, actually called out John and Laird as two of the big literary influences on the show. And we had to put JT in the middle to keep them from fighting over which one was a bigger influence. So that's it, and I think we're going to start with Ellen and go on through the evening, and if we have time at the end, you can ask questions, and if you buy books from any of these guys, they're all in the back. Everyone has their books for sale, and they will sign them or draw pictures in them or whatever you want.
In blood or in ink?
In blood or ink, so...
Your blood, not mine. Sorry.
We'll
or
all
any
use Ellen's
bodily
blood.
affluent. So,
Hi. Yes. Oh, okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I'm not going to be that close because I have to read something. But I've been editing either the year's best fantasy horror or the best horror of the year for about 26 years now. So I read an awful lot of short stories that are horror and not horror, looking for the things that I wouldn't say scare me, because very few stories actually scare me anymore. Maybe they never did, since I was a kid. But stories that really linger in a really nasty way and give me that sense of dread. And so I had to pick something that was short, and I did. And I also condensed. This is condensed slightly. It's a story by Nicholas Royal called The Obscure Bird. It was originally published in Black Static magazine and reprinted in the Best Horror of the Year, Volume 3. Let's see if I can do this without... I actually have never read someone else's story before, but let's see if I can do this without getting caught here. It was late. Gwen spent 10 minutes helping Andrew tidy up the kitchen and then put her arms out for a hug and said she was going up to bed. "I won't be long," Andrew said as he released her with a kiss. Gwen smiled. "Of course not," she said. It was a ritual. She knew it would be at least an hour, maybe more, before he joined her. Outside, an owl hooted. Andrew's eyes were dark behind the round lenses of his glasses, unfathomable. He turned to the sink and appeared to be staring out of the windows into the garden, which was cloaked in darkness. Gwen lay in bed thinking about Andrew, worrying. She heard his carefully weighted footsteps approach their bedroom door, stop for a moment, and then continue past. She heard him stop outside the baby's room where he would be listening for the sound of Henry's breathing, and then continue on down to his study at the rear of the house. She heard the door click shut and imagined him sitting in his desk, raising the lid of the laptop, then staring alternately at the screen and out of the window. "You know, you really should get more sleep," Gwen murmured in the morning as Andrew brought her a cup of tea. "I know, but, he said. "What?" "The professorship thing. I may not get it anyway, but I certainly won't if I don't get these papers done." In the bathroom, Duffy the cat lay on her back on the bath mat. Legs extended at either end of her glossy black body, she looked like a giant skate egg case. Gwen tickled her tummy, and Duffy's head darted forward to nibble at her wrist. Gwen checked in the baby's room and then went downstairs. Andrew had paused in the act of emptying the dishwasher and was staring out the window at the garden. She went up behind him and threaded her arms under his and held him tightly around the chest, resting her chin on his shoulder. "There's nothing we can do," Gwen said. Andrew's head swiveled around on his neck. "About Henry," she said, pulling back. "Oh," he said. "No, I know." They disengaged, and Gwen watched Andrew's back as he continued to empty the dishwasher. "It's all going to go, all that," he said, looking out the window again. "Not our trees, obviously, but everything beyond and the old railway cutting." She didn't know what to say. "I thought it was a good thing," he continued, extending the tram system, "but now I'm not so sure. All those trees, countless nesting sites." She looked at him without speaking for a moment before saying, "I've got to go to work." At the hospital, Gwen sat in the canteen with Angela. "How's Henry?" asked Angela. "We won't know for a while," Gwen answered. "Thanks for asking." "Fingers crossed, love." "Thanks. What about Andrew?" she asked. "He's under pressure at work, going for professorship." "Ooh, professor, eh?" Gwen thought for a moment. "Andrew's changing," she said, "whether in response to Henry or what, I don't know." "What do you mean?" "I saw an exhibit in the Didsbury Arts Festival," Gwen said. "There was a bamboo cage hanging from the ceiling with a tiny little screen in it playing a video of birds filmed in Beijing. Apparently, old men meet up in the mornings to play chess all over Beijing, and they take their songbirds with them in little cages. They hang the cages up in the branches of nearby trees, and while the old men play chess, the birds sing to one another." "Ah." Yeah, cute, isn't it? Gwen said, but it made me think of Andrew. He's like one of those birds stuck in his cage, tweeting to other lonely people trapped in their own cages. Tweeting? You know, Twitter, Facebook. We hardly talk anymore. We never have sex. I almost wish he'd raise his savings account and buy a sports car or have an affair. Angela laughed. Gwen looked at her watch. Better get on, she said. Gwen was standing at the kitchen table, checking through the post. Anything? Said a voice behind her. Christ, she spun around. You made me jump. You creep around so bloody quietly these days. Sorry. Duffy joined them in the kitchen. She's got something, Andrew said, bending down. Duffy opened her jaws and dropped a dead mouse on the wooden floor. Well done, Duffy, Gwen said. That's a good girl. She knelt down to tickle her and stroke her. You make more of a fuss of the cat than you do of me these days, Andrew said. Gwen gave him a look, and he smiled weakly. Sorry, he said. What do you want to eat, she asked him. I don't know. Well, Duffy knows what she wants, don't you, Duffy, she said as if speaking to a baby. The cat closed her nutcracker jaws around the mouse's head and bit down with a sustained audible crunch. They both watched as Duffy worked on the mouse, tearing at the skin and cracking its tiny bones. After a short while, the remains on the kitchen floor were no longer identifiable. Gwen wondered if Duffy would leave the guts and the legs and the tiny feet, but she swallowed every last shred, the bristly tail slipping down her throat last of all. Gwen realized she was grimacing. She felt a little sick. Previously, when Duffy had brought in birds or mice, either Gwen or Andrew had taken them off her, and if they were still alive and not too badly damaged, freed them outside. Knelt down next to her, Andrew turned his head 90 degrees to look directly at Gwen. His black eyes were expressionless. Gwen rose to her feet, knee joints popping. She went to the fridge and got out a plastic container of leftover homemade soup. We'll have this, she said, and pressed the button to open the door of the microwave. She gave a small cry and dropped the container of soup. It landed on its corner, dislodging the lid, and most of the soup splashed out onto his stocking feet and onto the floor, quickly spreading. What the fuck is that, she shouted, pointing inside the microwave. Sorry, Andrew answered, getting down on his knees with a roll of kitchen paper and mopping ineffectually at Gwen's feet. That's an owl pellet. What the fuck is an owl pellet, and what is it doing in the microwave, she yelled. Owls regurgitate the parts of their prey they can't eat, bones and fur and stuff. It all comes out in a little bundle, all carefully wrapped up like that. Why is it in the microwave? Oh, because if you want to dissect one, you should sterilize it first, and the best way to do that is in the microwave. Otherwise, the pellet can still be carrying rodent viruses or bacteria. Jesus. Gwen left the room. Dinner that night was a strained affair. Afterward, they sat at opposite... Yes, I don't know what they ate. Dinner that night was a strained affair. Afterward, they sat at opposite ends of the sofa, watching something on television that neither of them wanted to watch. As soon as it was over, Gwen announced she was going to bed. It'll give you a chance to dissect your owl pellet, she said. Where did you get it anyway? In the cutting, I climbed over a back wall and had a bit of a look around. I found the owl pellet at the base of one of the trees. There must have been an owl roosting there. Right, she said, softening. See you later. Were you looking on Henry? Yes, of course. Good night. Gwen fell asleep right away. Sometime in the night, she was aware of the duvet being lifted on Andrew's side and cold air wafting over her arm. Then the draft was shut off and she felt the warmth of his body next to hers. Gwen woke again and felt anxiety's talons seize her immediately. Andrew's side of the bed was cold, empty. She got up and walked on the landing. The darkness told her it was still nighttime. She opened the door to Henry's room. She saw his blue and white striped baby grow stretched out in the cot. The door to Andrew's study was open. He was not inside. Slowly, she descended the staircase and turned left at the bottom to stand in the kitchen doorway. Andrew was standing in front of the sink, staring out the window. She took a step forward, and one of the wooden boards creaked. Andrew's head started to turn, and continued to turn. It turned through 90 degrees and kept turning. She stood absolutely still, scarcely breathing. Andrew had not turned his body from the sink, but his gaze was now directed toward the fridge just to her left. Another few seconds and he would have twisted his neck through 180 degrees. Gwen felt the hairs on her arms rise. She backed out of the room and walked quickly but quietly upstairs. She lay in bed and at some point she fell asleep. In the morning, making the bed, she found a feather on the bottom sheet. She inspected the pillows and plumped them up. Andrew was in the kitchen. They tiptoed around each other. When Gwen arrived home from work, the kitchen was in darkness, but the light at the top of the stairs was on. She hung up her coat and stowed her bag. She wondered about making a drink and waiting in the kitchen. At some point, he would have to come down, and she would have to ask him to explain himself. Instead, she found herself walking up the stairs. She was halfway up when she heard him cough. He coughed again, abnormally, as if he was trying to clear his throat. Then there was a series of choking sounds, a desperate, almost metallic squawking, mechanical and animalistic at the same time. She ran up the remaining stairs and stopped on the landing. Andrew was standing in the middle of the bathroom, bent over at the waist. There was a small, indistinct bundle on the floor in front of him and a string of drool hanging from his mouth. The bundle, the pellet, was rounded, tapered at one end and bristly with hair. Under the brightness of the bathroom light, the whiteness of bone gleamed. She turned away. On the floor outside the baby's room at the other end of the landing, she saw something she thought she recognized. She took a step toward it. Even in the half-light, she could make out the blue and white stripes.
JT, you want to go next as JT?
Yeah, I'll be JT first. It's awesome to not read and be sitting up here and watch everybody listening to a story. Like, it's just like everybody's face sort of gets closer and closer, like Private Pile in Full Metal Jacket, like a sort of like distant gaze, and then realizing what's happening. It's awesome. I love it. So the first thing, I'll talk about Aurora West, because that's the book I'm selling tonight. And this is a graphic novel I did as a prequel to one that Paul Pope wrote and drew called Battling Boy. And they're both, as Grady says, comics about children fighting monsters. And his is sort of the son of a god who's sent to this planet to fight a city full of monsters after its hero has fallen. And mine takes place before that hero falls, and it's about his daughter learning how to fight monsters. And we're both, me and Paul are both fairly creepy guys. I mean, like Paul, most of his comics are very sort of dark, cyberpunky kind of drugs and violence sort of things. And I sort of switch between children's fiction and fairly extreme horror. The last screenwriting job I got, or two screenwriting jobs back, the executive in the opening notes, they were like, "Oh, we want you to adapt this thing, and just like we don't want any rape viruses or anything." And I was like, that has no basis in anything I've ever done, but it's sort of I guess what my reputation is in film or whatever. But regardless, as we were doing publicity for this thing, Paul started talking about why he wanted to do something for kids. And he sort of harkened back to the golden age of comics and how, these things would be appropriate for 12-year-olds, and how he's got nieces and nephews, and how he wants to give them a message about how scary the world is, right? That like everything's terrifying and they're constantly in danger and they have to be strong enough to fight. And he was saying that to me, and I'm pretending this is Paul. That's not Paul. But he's saying that to me, and I'm sitting there, and I realized I felt exactly the opposite about why I would write this book. So this is sort of a rebuttal speech to the topic of the night. But essentially, like, I think that I write fiction if it's aimed at children in encouraging children to misbehave. Like, I think the world's not nearly as dangerous as we all think. And I feel like humans as a species, like we run this planet and we're going to ride it until it dies. And like individually, we're totally beset by disease and violence and poverty and horror and all the things that can affect us. But as a species, we are the cockroaches. And the most interesting people that I know are people who went out and sought danger. And so as sort of, and like thinking back on the children's fiction that I liked, all the like Roald Dahl and all of that sort of stuff, it was all about like going out and transgressing. And so I sort of said that, and we like got into a small conversation, which is terrible press, about having opposite intentions in the books that we wrote. And it's sort of, especially I guess weird to me because I'm also recently a father, or not that recently. I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. But I can't also be the person who's like telling them to go get in trouble, even though that's sort of like honestly what I believe. And it sort of ties into the whole reason of like why you want to write scary books. And I'm sure everybody's got a different answer to that, and it's a question that comes up constantly in interviews and stuff. And I feel like everybody's answer changes all the time. My favorite is the blues singer from The Simpsons. Lisa was asking him why he sings the blues, and he explains that it's not about making you feel better, it's about making other people feel worse. And it's such a good line, I think, for storytellers in general and horror writers in particular. Like, every horror filmmaker I've met is the biggest cream puff in the world, and the same goes for all of these guys, and like totally, and like God, Wes Craven, the guy who directed Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream and all of those, like he had to leave Reservoir Dogs because he couldn't take the ear cutting scene. And like I hear that kind of thing over and over again. And I think that all of us are people who've like spent all of our lives being terrified and just want other people to be as scared as we are. And I specifically remember going to horror films and horror books and reading all of this stuff as a kid, almost to try to like cure myself of being constantly afraid of the wrong things. Because even at the time, it's like I realized like things that I was scared of like, girls and being judged by people who I hated, and like all of these things that would just terrify me all the time were just meaningless. And I think that when horror fiction is good and when monster stories are good, they teach you about the right thing to be scared about instead of the wrong thing to be scared about. And so much of what we're being told to be scared of, Ebola and ISIS and vaccinating your children and all this silly stuff, is all bad fear. And bad fear is like viral and dangerous and makes you dumber, and it makes everything seem scarier, right? If they can convince you to be scared of ISIS and Ebola, you can be scared of foreigners. Or it's like it's this weird. People who are telling you to be scared are usually lying, and good horror, something like The Shining, where it's the film The Shining I'll talk about here, but like less so in the book. But it's saying that like ghosts are scary, but drunken murderous fathers are the real danger. And so taking this all sort of back to like trying to write horror that encourages misbehavior, and how I think about that with my children, the thing that sort of scares me the most right now is turning work out into the world and my children eventually being teenagers who are going to read it. And like they're not going to like me when they're teenagers anyway, but the thought of them looking at what I wrote like 10 years ago it just chills me. But I think that it's useful because as their father, I'm going to be teaching them to be scared of things whether I want it or not, just because I've got so many tens of thousands of years of evolution pre-civilization that's telling me to protect and cradle these things that are totally tough and able to take care of themselves. And so I'm hoping that like when I'm a jackass and actually talking to them, they can look at my fiction and actually get something valuable. I think that's about it, yeah.
John, you want to
Sure.
go next?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So before I start, I just want to say thank you very much for coming out for this. Thank you to Grady for putting it together, and thank you very much to the Strand for hosting us. This is far and away the coolest venue I have ever done any kind of reading in. There's a book safe back there. A book safe, people. I can't tell you what books are in it because they destroy your minds, but so yeah, please, these poor booksellers have stayed here to put up with this, so please, buy some books, help them out. This is an essay I wrote a couple of years ago for, I think it was Monster Month at Oren Gray's blog, and this is called Teratography. Family tradition has it that when I was born, my father was watching a monster movie. He'd been watching one on the home TV when my mom told him it was time to go to the hospital, and hours later, by the time I was making my squalling entrance into this world, he'd found another such film on the waiting room TV. My mom, no fan of these movies, doesn't know what either movie was. Their names are another of the things I never asked my dad before he died. I suppose I could try to research TV schedules for upstate New York in 1969, but I don't really need to know the movies' titles. What matters is that my birth was attended by monsters. The earliest memory I have of being scared by a movie involves an adaptation of Frankenstein I've never been able to track down, despite rather extensive investigation. My father watched it one weeknight on the TV in his and my mother's room, which was the family TV. He sat in his easy chair with the lights out. And I can't recall him doing this for any other movie, which makes me think he really must have wanted to see this one. My mother was not interested in viewing the film. She sat at the kitchen table with my brother and sister, gluing popsicle sticks together for some type of project. Making little men? I may have been 6 or 7. Whatever age I was, Dad considered me old enough to watch this version of Frankenstein with him. My recollections of the film itself are fragmentary. The screen had a red tint, which I don't recall with anything else we saw, so I guess that shading was particular to this film or the print of it. The monster was pale, thin, dressed in a hairy vest, pants, and tennis shoes. At one point, he was chained to a papier-mâché-looking rock. Whatever scene that was took place on what might have been a theatrical stage. Could this have been a stage version of the story being televised? Maybe. I kept moving, staying a minute or two in the darkness with my dad, then exiting to my mom in the brightly lit kitchen. Each time I appeared, Mom urged me to stay with her and my siblings. I did not. What was it that I found so compelling about the film? I don't remember. What was it about this version of Frankenstein that was so frightening it would leave the monster, the figure who would chase me through my nightmares? I don't know. If I saw something, some terrible act committed by the monster, I buried it too deep in my subconscious to retrieve. Perhaps, though, it wasn't anything worse than what remains in my memory. My father sitting in the dark in his easy chair, the TV screen red in front of him. Perhaps it wasn't anything worse than him telling me this was a movie about a monster. When I was maybe in 3rd grade, I was off school sick for several days with a stomach bug. In addition to the pleasures of crisp, cool sheets and cups of cool ginger ale, not to mention my mom's attention, I was allowed to watch the black and white TV in my and my brother's room. This was pre-cable, and during the long hours between the early morning and mid-afternoon cartoons, there wasn't a great deal of interest on offer. The station out of Secaucus filled the late morning with old movies, and sometimes one of these was worth a look. The film I wound up watching that day was set in a mining camp somewhere in the American Southwest. At its beginning, a round of blasting uncovered a perfectly preserved Allosaurus egg, along with the deposit of radioactive material, which both caused the egg to hatch and rendered its former inhabitant invisible. It also may have accelerated the dinosaur's growth. Within a few scenes, he was stalking and attacking the members of the mining team. In the lead-up to each attack, there may have been 3-toed footprints advancing across the desert sand, but during the actual event, the camera shifted to the Allosaurus's point of view, the screen filled with the screaming face of his victim, their hands flung up to defend themselves, long slashes opening up and down their cheeks while the dinosaur's oddly distant, almost warbling roar swelled the soundtrack. I'm reasonably certain the beast was destroyed with fire, a conflagration during which its silhouette became briefly visible. At the time, I didn't think this movie a triumph of low-budget filmmaking. I was frustrated not to have been able to see the Allosaurus because I love dinosaurs as only a small boy can. But rather than striking me as ridiculous, the idea of an invisible, carnivorous dinosaur on the prowl made me deeply uneasy. That night, by the time my brother and I were going to sleep, my unease had progressed to out-and-out fear. My father answered my calls for parental aid, but once he'd heard the reason for my anxiety, his concern soured to irritation. If the movie was too scary, I shouldn't have watched it. I tried to explain that it hadn't been too scary while I was watching it with the lights on and the sun shining and Mom bustling around the house. It was only now in the dark and the night and the quiet that it had become frightening. My explanation did not win me any more of my father's sympathy. You might assume I'd learned some kind of lesson from this experience, but the next day when I was off sick again, I begged my mother to let me watch another weird movie on Channel 9. If anyone had learned from the previous day, it was Mom, who subjected me to a rigorous round of "you're sure this won't be too scary for you" questioning before consenting to my viewing the film. This movie took place at sea. I'm reasonably sure it must have been somewhere in the Sargasso Sea. The survivors of a shipwreck, or maybe their ship was torpedoed, were they English? I recall one actor at least having an English accent, drifted into a part of the sea that was inhabited by a group of people who had been living there for a long, long time, centuries, I think. These people lived in huts built on stilts and connected to one another by a series of narrow walkways set close to the water's surface. The Sargasso dwellers may have had a king or leader who was an old man hobbled by bad counsel from his trusted aides. What made the film stand out for me, though, were its monsters. These great seaweed-covered mounds, taller and wider than any of the characters, they shuffled forward with a motion that shook the plants draping them. These things might have been the allies of the Sargasso dwellers, their pets or something analogous, or they may have been an ever-present menace. Whatever their status at the movie's beginning, by its end, they were a definite threat, and this film, too, ended with fire. I wish I could convey how strange the film felt to me, how different, not just due to the seaweed heaps, but due to the sheer oddness of its setting. I must have guessed the night to come would not be a pleasant one, but lying there in my bed next to the bedroom door, which was open ever so slightly to the kitchen light streaming down the hallway, I knew the darkness of my room to be immense, full of shapes like great black boulders. This time I did not call for my father. I knew what he would say, and I supposed he would be right. I'd earned this. Halloween of my junior year in high school, one of the local malls rented some unused store space to a haunted house troupe. Located directly across from the movie theater, the place, whose name I've forgotten, had an unassuming design. Basically, a long rectangle with the entrance on the right side, the exit on the left side, and the ticket window roughly equidistant between them. The front wall was painted with seasonally appropriate graveyards and ghosts, spiderwebs and skeletons, all under a sky full of a fat white moon. Some kind of music or a sound effects record, the noises of wind and creaking floorboards played faintly. At regular intervals, someone inside the haunted house would scream or laugh, or scream then laugh. I can't imagine it was that laughter that convinced me this was something I had to do. I know it wasn't my younger brother, whom I'm pretty sure I had to browbeat into joining me. My father was surprisingly amenable to the plan, and in short order my brother and I were passing through a heavy drape into a short, dark hall that turned to the left, becoming an almost pitch-dark tunnel. At the opposite end from us, a figure sat under a faint light that looked as if it were shining down through a grating. Most of its face was in shadow, but I knew right away the cavernous eyes, the slab of pale brow, the flattened cranium of Frankenstein's creation. My legs stopped moving. All the air went out from the hallway. "Hello, boys," the monster said in a low, pleasant voice. My jaw was quivering. "Why don't you come down here?" the monster continued. "I'm not going to scare you." I have been frightened since that moment, but that is the last time I can remember being so overcome with fear, my joints locked, and I could not move. To his credit, my brother did not abandon me. "No one's going to scare you," the monster said. And I started babbling, a flood of words bursting forth from my mouth. "I know you're not going to scare us because you're not scary, you're my friend." And then something gave inside me and I rushed my brother out of the way we had come in, past a pair of girls somewhere around my age who favored us with glances of disgust. My father hadn't realized we'd never made it past that first corridor. When we told him what had happened, he was annoyed at our wasting money. Although I feel sure I must have watched it at some point before this. The first time I can say for sure that I watched James Whale's Frankenstein was the summer of 1999. After having been away from writing horror fiction for most of the past decade, I plunged back into it, and as part of that immersion, was viewing and reviewing whatever screen classics the local video store had. I have to confess, Mel Brooks's inspired Young Frankenstein was more clear in my memory than Whale's original, and it was difficult to the point of impossible not to watch scenes in the earlier film through the lens of the later. There was one moment, however, after the monster's creation, when he's been locked away in the castle dungeons, where he's being tormented by Fritz, Frankenstein's assistant. When we look down a long hallway at the monster standing quietly, his head tilted forward, his dead eyes looking out at us. It can't be any more than 2 or 3 seconds of film time, but it seemed much, much longer. For the length of that shot, I was back in the haunted house with my younger brother. I was in that dark room with my father and the red screen of the TV. Thank you.
It's another essay, is that okay?
Yeah, why not?
Well, Grady, thank you for organizing this, and thank you to the folks here at the Strand for having us, and thank all of you for coming and listening. I do want to say one thing, JT. I find myself in agreement with you about the resilience of kids and how we sort of helicopter them these days, because, not to say a great thing, but I think back to my childhood. I was raised in Alaska, and my parents, and I would not recommend this, but my parents left a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 6-year-old alone 4 days at a stretch. And I'm still here. We had a house full of axes, guns, you name it. And, you know, it's not something that I would recommend, but I do think when people are afraid to let their kids take out the trash, that's the other end of the extreme. So a few months ago, actually about a year ago, I was asked to do to contribute an essay for Nightmare Magazine, which is run by John Joseph Adams. And every month he has an author come in and talk about a horror. And the piece that I'm going to read to you is called Babes in the Wilderness, and it's a little bit of, it's kind of a personal essay. It talks about, it's sort of in a roundabout way answers that question that we all get all the time. Why do you write what you write? This isn't really the answer to why I write what I write, but I think it explains why I write in some of the fashion that I do, or what informs what I do. What terrifies us? There are universal constants, but ultimately it's a personal question. And for me, the answer lies in the code, a pattern inscribed by providence and by environment. We, by our experiences, are conditioned to appreciate particular artifacts, particular nuances of the human condition. And sometimes that appreciation shades toward awe, toward fear and trembling. Some years ago, I left Alaska, land of my birth. And since then, I've dwelt in the cities and farmland of the Pacific Northwest and deep in the mountains of western Montana. At the moment, the trail has led a long and winding way to upstate New York, about as far as one can migrate east and still dwell within the continental US. And nothing has changed for me except the scenery. Great storms lashed the east this spring, followed by unseasonably hot weather, lending this region the lush vibe of a temperate jungle. Brood 2 awoke from its 17-year slumber and took over the world. Trillions of cicadas bored through dirt and leaves to emerge here in the Hudson Valley. And out in the green and the dark, the cicadas trilled. Their communal song rose to an agonizing pitch on the decibel register. For a time, it was an alien universe beyond the back deck of the house. That relentless song ceased every evening, but continued to echo in my dreams, shaping them. And come the dawn, the song resumed. Day after day, for over a month, so the cycle went, until one morning, a hush fell over the nearby woods, a hush interrupted only by faint bird calls, the rustle of leaves shifting against one another, indifferent to the annihilation of Brood 2. Death in manifold forms swept up innumerable flickering insect souls and bore that light into the green and leafy graveyards that surround our toy model constructs. Weeks later, I walked among the withered carcasses of the cicada host. Hollow shells crunched beneath my tread. Reek and rot had diminished to a hint of perfume on the night breeze. I thought, this could be us. One day it will be us. What I believe to be true of horror is that the experience is most intimate and most personal, and that it inevitably swings round to death. Death in the physical mortality, death of innocence, disintegration of moral constructs, erosion of sanity, physical transformation, either sub or post-human. But where does it all go? The energy matrix that animates us, into the ground, into the water, maybe into the sub-zero vacuum of space, or the maw of a black hole. What's around us is merely a reflection of what lies within us, writ large as mountain ranges and star fields. And I've long considered setting to be a critical element of horror and dark fantasy literature, because a well-drawn location amplifies mood and atmosphere, secondary characteristics that are vital to such tales. So much of horror and the weird depends upon the architecture and the lay of the land, whether the action occurs within a haunted mansion or the bowels of a cavern. X marks the spot, and if that spot intensifies isolation, if it engenders dislocation or estrangement from civilization's normative state, then so much the better. Horror is a primitive nerve. My bias leans toward the wilderness and its raw, flensing majesty, its implacable reality that transcends human pretense of superiority, if not negate our perceived significance. In the right hands, the landscape is of greater consequence than a mere backdrop. It becomes a character. It becomes an antagonist. This is exemplified in the classic short story by Jack London, To Build a Fire, wherein the man succumbs inexorably to the cold as the dog looks on, and all around this pair looms a vista of ice and snow and trees, silent as death. Then there's Hyboria, stomping grounds of Robert Howard's infamous Barbarian, and the crucible of Conan's transformation into a steely-thewed killing machine, home of weird beasts and weirder civilizations. Consider also the alien river islets of the Willows and the frigid outlands of the Wendigo by Blackwood, or the godforsaken moonscapes of the deserts of Mexico as indelibly imprinted upon our hindbrains by McCarthy, and the lashed and seared post-apocalyptic nightmare vistas of his epic, The Road. The characters in these tales are important, but they are challenged and illuminated by the landscapes they tread. Conan bursts from the wilderness to master the settled lands with his savagery, and the hunting party in the Wendigo is illustrative of how the primeval world waits to swallow mankind whole. And the father and son bear witness to the fall of civilization and the revealed primacy of the devouring universe as they trek the road. It is the landscape that dominates. It is the wilderness that defines. In the course of preparing this essay, in the course of preparing an essay, I revisited the Wendigo a few years ago. The fires of summer were dwindling, and nights grew chill in my quiet neighborhood on the farmland outskirts of Olympia in Washington. It is a region of big old fir and maple, pocked by lakes and swamps, and even my suburban street lay beneath a mantle of primeval force during the long hours after midnight. I read Blackwood and also Carl Edward Wagner, that master of the rural horror story, as the winds came out of the north and the great limbs of the trees creaked and groaned along the black street, and the rain slapped the glass of my office window. And I considered the many times I'd bunkered down in a tent or under a simple tarp back in the days of my youth when my travels took me through the wilderness of Alaska as a matter of routine. This experience revived in me an awareness that during my youth, I'd lived for many years with an unconscious but ever-present fatalism. There were dangerous animals, treacherous ice, and blizzards to contend with. My own flawed preparation, the naive sense of invincibility we possess as young adults. All these presented the potential for serious mishap, as did encounters with the occasional fellow traveler, for not everyone in the wilderness is well met. The fatalism crept in over time, after I'd survived a blizzard by virtue of dumb luck, and I've carried it with me ever since, like a talisman against the dark. Men and the works of men are tiny things against the backdrop of the terrestrial wilderness, and but specks lost in the cosmic gulf that yawns between flickering points of light. When attempting to make sense of the ineffable, to grapple with horrors, fantastic or mundane, we would do well to remember this. For at least a decade after I departed Alaska, I experienced recurring dreams. In the most persistent of these, I walked across a plain of small stones and scrub brush toward a tiny cabin. The cabin was gray and decrepit. Its windows were smashed in black sockets. As I trudged in shirt sleeves and tennis shoes, the sky darkened into iron. Snowflakes began to swirl around me. Snow froze upon my lashes and the cabin was lost. I'm often asked where I get my ideas, and since I'm a horror writer, I'm often asked with suspicion. It's not an easy question to answer with a straight face. The cliched question has become far more interesting to me of late, because I've chosen to take it literally. Where indeed? When speaking of muses, we may speak not only of passion and logic, intuition and divine inspiration, but also of place, the landscape of deep primordial consciousness that lies in the ocean womb and at the heart of the earth, and of course, within the human heart. My chief muse is a pass through the Kaltag Mountains to Unalakleet in Alaska, a bridge between the Yukon and the Bering Sea. Many years have rolled by since my last visit, but I dream of that range often. The coldness, the shape, and the darkness lie submerged in memory, so that only the sonar of Dreamtime ever really makes sense of its immensity. Other times I dream of the great immaculate and star-studded blackness that is a March night on the frozen Yukon River itself, or the ancient hills between Ophir and Iditarod, where a handful of dusty snow can swirl to the empty horizon upon a gust of wind. Yet moments later, 100-strong herd of caribou might wheel over a ridge and thunder in a vast wedge of fur and hoof until it becomes a flickering shadow against the frozen sun. It must be similar for anyone who dwells overlong in a region dominated by its geographical features. The contours of the landscape pattern the contours of our minds. As the comport of your mentors and authority figures impress your child's brain, by osmosis do the vicissitudes of season and weather leach into your psyche. And as an artist, when you breathe life onto the sterile canvas, it is the blood of the beast, the howl of the storm, that is emitted.
And I think you're going to be Sarah now.
Yeah.
It's time to be Sarah.
Yeah, I'll keep my own voice. I'm not putting on my Tuesday night outfit or anything. But of all the things I envy you for, your childhood is amazing. So this is a story by Sarah Langan. She's in the process of writing this. This is for a collection she's doing for Blumhouse, which I believe is going to be out sometime next year. And this story is called The Old Jail by Sarah Langan. And just to warn you, there's two parts to this. She gave me like the first 5 pages, and then she cut out all the exposition and then a juicy scene in the middle. So that's going to happen. The Old Jail. I'm possessed, my brother Ezra shouts. I've just arrived at 949 Park Avenue, where he works as an elevator operator. He's standing just inside, like one of the gargoyles. Good to see you too, I shout back. The armory next door is undergoing a condo renovation, so it's an especially loud morning in Manhattan. Ezra disappears into the 6th floor townhouse, and I follow. He's wearing a filthy red uniform, his curly blonde hair snarled into dreads, his breath like cat shit. We round the doorman's stand and get to the old-fashioned elevator, where the drilling and hammering is muffled by 12 inches of 100-year-old limestone. My demon's name is Silas Khan, and it's slimed inside my ear because I love Bartok, he announces. Did you get this from Star Trek? I ask. He flicks all 10 fingers at me, exuding the same kind of crazy as sandwich board apocalypse criers. Heathen! It's squirming behind my eyes right now. It controls all my autonomous functions. My eyes are burning. It won't let me blink. I'm tempted to suggest that his eyes are tearing because he's been farting the last 60 seconds and that a man who subsists on butter pickles and Beefeater gin should expect a downside. But I've never actually enjoyed making fun of him. It's just this thing I can't help doing. Ezra gets in my face, nose to nose. I underestimated. His breath is worse than cat shit. It's a barn full of flatulent pigs in there. The shadow government is tracking us closely with hidden cameras. Interglot. Holy shit, I say. It's not just me. This is a contagion of demonic proportions. I breathe through the sleeve of my sports jacket. I'm here because 949's management called. They say you punched a poodle. I'm hoping that's a euphemism. Anyway, you're fired. Ezra's tense posture slackens like someone's just unzipped his imaginary truss. He sighs. Oh, the poodle. But we've never really liked yippy dogs, have we, Jay? I can't help it, I laugh. Ezra looks to make sure I'm not poking fun, then joins me. It's bad to punch dogs, I'll admit that, he says. My brother's a paranoid schizophrenic with an IQ of 150. He was normal until he started working in academia, which I'm told can happen to the best of us. As an adjunct professor at Bennington, he accused his department chair of activating an Al-Qaeda sleeper cell with a pen light. For obvious reasons, his tenure got denied. When he moved back with my parents in Larchmont, they told him to snap out of it. A few weeks later, he greeted them at the dinner table draped in a sheet. When he lifted his arms, blood gushed down all sides. He'd driven 10 penny nails clean through both wrists. Ezra was released from Mount Sinai's inpatient psychiatric program 6 months ago. He wasn't cured, we just ran out of money. Over the years, that $4 million in hospital co-pays devoured my family's wealth. My status in life has fallen accordingly. My kids go to public school and my clothes come from discount stores. We vacation on our roof and call it Forest Hills Beach. After my parents moved to Florida, I volunteered to be Ezra's emergency contact. 949's management called this morning about the poodle, and also about the fact that he's been squatting in their boiler room. So here I am, crammed beside the closet-sized elevator of a pre-war townhouse in the wealthiest part of Manhattan, talking to my homeless twin brother about his newest paranoid fantasy, demonic possession. Okay, I'll bite. Demons are intelligent infections, and you've come down with a bad case, I say. Yes, he shouts, his whole body jerking, limbs shivering, delighted I might actually believe him. Oh, yes, I knew you'd understand. I've always been able to trust you. There are some in the building with the infection, and I've tracked down a carrier from outside. His name's Dan Kahn. Demonic typhoid Mary? Ezra Dimple grins with coffee-stained teeth. Well stated, brother. He plans to free all the demons and infect the world. Well, Ezra, this is all compelling stuff, and I'm going to think hard on it. But I've got to ask, are you snorting your meds again? Ezra wipes his eyes, which it's true, don't blink. Then he smiles this sweet, lost smile, and I see his future. The homeless guy you're not scared of. The old vagabond sleeping over the subway grate, whose family you decide must be useless to have left him so alone. Come with me to the basement, he says. You'll believe me then. Just then, a sunbeam, skinny young woman in stretchy black workout clothes strides through the lobby. She clearly wants to go someplace on the elevator and doesn't seem to know that its operator is insane. I tap the metal cage lift with my knuckles and it rattles. Sorry, technical difficulties. She looks from me to Ezra. We're identical, but I'm clean cut. A button-down polo, buzzed short hair, married, two kids, a mortgage, and migraines. I keep a reporter's notebook in my pocket because I like writing more than typing. Ever see the Patty Duke show? I ask, trying to break the tension. She shrugs, and I realize that no one born after 1980 has seen the Patty Duke show. I'm so goddamn old. Can you guys do your plumbing or whatever later? I need to go to my apartment. It's a private matter. We're just propping our hands on bony hips. She gets nasty. See this building? This is my house. I come here to relax. One of you needs to take me to my apartment right now. I grew up and went to college with this type of woman. My friends married her for connections and admissions to the university club. I thank the flying spaghetti god every day that I settled on a daughter of a St. Lucian nanny instead. Go eat some poor people, I tell her. The woman glares at my chest, then Ezra's. We actually have sound design. This is amazing. She finds his name tag and presumably memorizes it. I notice then that she's emitting the same ode to pig farts as Ezra. Stranger still, what I'd thought was gloss on her lips is glistening blood. It crawls along the sides of her mouth, vampiric. She spins, her rubber-soled sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, and heads for the stairs. Let's get you checked into Sinai before she calls the cops on us, I say. My proof, he says, the basement. Make it quick. Ezra opens the elevator's articulated door. It's a rattling wrought iron cage. As we ride down, a black thing glitters behind his eyes, and for a second, I think he's right. There's something other inside him. Creak. He opens the door and we're out. The basement's dark except for a red emergency exit sign. Ezra flips a light so that his ceiling bulb's radiance splashes against pink cinder block. We're in a long hall with shut-down doors running its length. A water bug struggles against its glue trap on the floor. Ezra looks me up and down. Something registers. He seems to actually see me, his brother, and not just the poor slob who cleans his messes. Hi, Jay, he says. Hello yourself. He cups my shoulder with his 10-penny scarred palms. I'm not in the mood, but it's not worth fighting either. His eyes are wet with tears. Bear hug. Thanks for coming, he says. You're my only friend. Ditto. Except for Daisy, I say. Ezra is the sincere one. I'm sarcastic. We've kept to those roles even when we haven't wanted to, for the sake of people like our teachers and parents and girlfriends, who needed exaggerated behaviors in order to tell us apart. After he had his breakdown, I came to understand that his sincerity made him vulnerable to our genetic disease. My sarcasm protected me. Be careful, my demon wants you, he whispers. You've got so much more to lose. I'm going to have him committed to Mount Sinai once we get out. They'll outsource him to a cheap public madhouse like Bellevue. He's too gentle for a place like that. It'll eat him up. Show me what you want to show me, I say, my voice rough. We walk to the end of the hall, navigating past a nylon sleeping bag on the floor, a jar filled with urine, and 3 garlic blooms. Their peels are scattered in a circle like fallen rubber tree leaves. We get to the last door. Someone has penciled eyes all along the archway. They're human-sized and almost seem to be watching. Creepy, I say, as Ezra swings the door open. The stench is so bad that I bend over and spit. Flies buzz around a giant grinding boiler. Scribbled in black Sharpie on the dingy white walls are 1,000 foreign language hieroglyphs. Scattered within these hieroglyphs is one sentence of English, written again and again. Ezra is dead. Jerking crazily, Ezra opens the third locker from a row of them alongside the door. You see, he asks. A giant pile of glinting white and red hunks cascade out. They sound like clay mugs, clinking. They skitter like sea creatures. One lands right at my feet. Is that a human femur? I ask. Ezra's not smiling that sweet, lost smile. Something's changed. He's taller and he moves his body angrily like a hand inside a puppet. His eyes aren't his own. This is not my brother, lunging at me. I don't see the switchblade until it stabs right through my right palm. The pain's like cold blue sparks. I'd normally be too polite, too shocked to fight back. But this is Ezra. I make a tightening fist and spring. It connects with his jaw. I expect him to drop, but he's still standing. A black ribbon of skin slithers behind the whites of his eyes. He moans, as he presses his hand against his jaw to realign it. Then he bites down. I don't understand what's happening. He's grinning the whole time, even as he tears his lower lip away from his mouth. Ezra, I say, coming towards him. He's been waiting for this. He swipes his legs behind me and I drop. He's on me. I'm pinned, his mouth, blood pouring. He swings the blade down with both hands. It's a low blow, but I don't care. I knee his balls and roll. Steel plinks. A fly lands in my eye, another up my nose. They're swarming. Ezra, I shout like we're still 15. Mercy? Uncle? The knife flashes. I'm grunting, or he is, or both of us. I turn the blade around with my wounded hand. He's blinded by all the flinging blood. I stab. The blade slides through the depression between his clavicles. It's so messy. Let me wrap that up, I say, or I think I do. Maybe I just shout hysterical things like keep calm and don't worry and stop running all over the goddamn room so I can help you. Like a dumb animal, Ezra reels. Blood marks his trail. It takes a long time before I'm able to catch him and hold him still. I've got you, I say. He's smiling that too sweet for this world smile. My brother once again. It's okay. You don't have to worry, he whispers, as he drives the blade deeper, slicing left to right. So I've got the middle part of this story too. It goes into darker territory, if y'all are comfortable with that. I know there's young folks in the audience. Should we keep it low? All right.
We can do that one though, and then we can just...
Well, I think Grady's still got to speak as well.
Do you want to do it, or do we have time? Or
Do time.
we have time? Okay, go for it.
You sure? Okay. It is gross.
Sorry, kids.
Okay. So our narrator has children, and he's married, and his brother has just killed himself by committing seppuku in the building of the basement of the building where he was the manager. And the brother is basically trying to prove whether he was possessed or crazy or what's going on. So he's conducting interviews with different tenants. So he comes into the apartment of a woman named Margaret Brooks, who's been in this building for ages. Can you state your name, I ask. Margaret Brooks' mouth is her most prominent feature. It juts, horse-like. She's a Hungarian immigrant turned 1950s pinup girl who married rich, raised 2 kids, and has reached the grand age of 93. From the looks of her morphine brown IV drip, she won't make it to 94. I have many names, Margaret wheezes from her antique wooden wheelchair. The receiving salon in this classic 7 and 949 Park Avenue is decorated in 1940s post-war boom. Vintage New York covers in brass frames. A silver tea set, a Tiffany lamp, a playbill signed by Maria Callas, geometric furniture built to last. Bartok is playing on an old record player, an eerie string piece. There's not a speck of dust or grime, as if the entire room is sprayed daily with a fire hose and then oven baked. Would you mind itemizing those names? Pshaw, you're not interested in us. You only like pretty young things, Margaret rasps. The younger the better. I'm the father of girls. That's not a funny joke to me, I say. Hush, Margaret laughs, wheezes, slapping her scarecrow knees. Huss. What's so funny? She bares her giant horse teeth. They've got to be dentures. Sucker cock. Margaret's granddaughter Minnie, who's been on the couch playing iPhone zombie Tetris since answering the door, looks up at last. I just love kids. I wish I had them. Cutie little babies, but the clock is ticking, you know. I'm going to be 35. I nod. She's at least 40. Still, Minnie says as she reaches across the couch to hand her red-eyed grandmother a tube of Visine, you should know I'd definitely make a good stepmommy. I'm super nice, and I'm okay with not being the most loved. Well, you never know. Mr. Wright could be waiting for you right now on a park bench outside of Hooters, I say. Then I pull a photo of Ezra on my phone. Do you recognize this man? Margaret flashes a small, teasing grin. It's you. It's my brother, the former elevator operator of this building. Sure looks like you. Minnie chimes as she snaps the phone out of my hand. Her broken fingernails are caked in corn syrupy yellow grime. He stabbed himself in the basement of this building, I say. He thought he was possessed, like you. Ezra Wright, Margaret says, leaning forward, her voice low with the import of a secret. My heart races because I think I'm going to learn something. I knew him. Bad breath. She slaps her knees. She thinks she's so funny. Meanwhile, Minnie squirrels my phone down the front of her electric blue Lycra jog tights. I noticed that you rode the elevator together for hours. What did you and Ezra talk about? I ask. The pigs, Margaret says. Pigs? Margaret points to her head with a silver-spotted finger. Mine don't matter, cutty suck. This interview is going as badly as the sales of my first book. Can I have my phone? I ask Minnie. She sticks out her tongue and squirms it around like a loose snail from its shell. Can I have your number? I ought to be polite for the sake of the story, but this is gross. My brother died, lady. They found 3 bodies in the basement of this building, and nobody gives a damn because they were homeless. Give me my phone. Minnie's mouth makes a lip gloss greasy O. She peels the phone from her pants and throws it at me. Thank you from the rock bottom of my heart, I say. I hate you, Minnie cries as she runs into the kitchen. Her giant ass shakes as if having a two-sided conversation. Margaret bursts into laughter. I look out the window, wishing it were open. There's a view of the Park Avenue Armory outside, guys in hard hats walking the roof, clawing back 100-year-old slates. I think you're not possessed at all, I say. It's an excuse because you're contrite for something you've done. That's why you agreed to the interview. You need to clear your conscience. Margaret's laughter slows. She rubs the tape over her IV needle, which is yellow with age. It can't have changed in days. I've seen the elevator footage. I know you and some kid, Lucas Novo, were in the basement with my brother around the time the bodies disappeared. The autopsy report shows that many of the bites were made by adult gums with 2.5-inch diameter, not teeth. I'd say that's your size. Funny coincidence, isn't it? Margaret tongues her giant dentures. Click. They lock into place. Bright red blood trickles out the sides where the edges have bitten her skin. They're way too big for her. Give a doggy a bone. Llewellyn Craft is my favorite, Margaret says. Who is she? A little girl who lives in my mouth. Here, I'll take her out and you can meet her, Margaret says. Then she farts. It's ammonia and sulfur. She chuckles. That's disgusting, I say. By now, Minnie's come back. She's leaning in the doorway, drying her eyes with a cherry-embroidered handkerchief. I try to smile like I'm happy to see her. When did this possession begin, I call. About 3 months ago, JJ, Minnie says. Was she like this before? Minnie frowns, and I can see that she's pretty like her grandmother used to be. A Lauren Bacall type gone to seed. Her eyes are especially wide, and her face is clean and symmetrical. About the same. Did you know my grandpa died because she fed him old meat? Scrombotoxin. And my mom and uncles died of stomach cancer. Doctors said it was a lifetime of dirty food. I read that, I said. Why do you think she was acquitted? Minnie laughs a worldly, bitter laugh. If you sent everybody to jail for slowly killing the people they're supposed to love, the streets would be pretty empty. Anyway, here's what you need to know. Bad people are easy to possess. That's why the demons went to my Grammy first. It's the nice guys the devil has to work on, you know? Your brother was real nice. Was he? I ask. Minnie grins in the sing-song. She says, You know. I check my phone. This interview began 9 minutes ago. It feels like 2 hours. I'm screaming uncomfortable. A polite suggestion. You both need psychiatrists. Now, Minnie, on the phone you mentioned your grandmother writes runes. They're these pre-Christian letters that look like knobby sticks. My brother sharpied your boiler room with them. May I see Margaret's? Margaret yanks the bloody dentures from her mouth. Her whole face sags as if sucked inside a vacuum. Ignore the idiot. I'll foul you. She gums. Then spins her wooden chair and starts down the hall, morphine IVs skating along behind. There's a glue trap stuck to one of her wheels, so the sound goes roll scat, roll scat. Minnie and I follow. Roll scat, roll scat. We pass doors on the left and right, all closed. Margaret throws open the last door at the very end, then signals for Minnie to help her turn around and head back. The stink brings water to my eyes. I feel for a light. My fingers come back gritty. Clap, JJ, Minnie giggle shouts. I clap. The grit on my hands sprays around in the dark. You have to clap twice fast, you silly boy. I clap twice, fast. The hall and bedroom lights flicker on. My God, I say. I wipe my shit crummy fingers against my khakis and gag. It's my favorite sentence in this thing. Then I pull out my camera. The runes cover most of the walls and part of the ceiling over Margaret's king-size bed. Like Ezra's, they're written backwards as a mean of cursing the reader with bad luck. Unlike Ezra's, they're written in shit. I check what's openly visible, then start opening drawers. Hand over mouth, I open the closet last. Inside are a pile of expensive old Chanel suits she's been using to write her excrement with. $3,000 paintbrushes, essentially. Along the door jamb, she's drawn a row of eyes. One of them looks especially familiar. It looks like it belongs to Ezra, to me. I look at those eyes for a long time. When I come back out, the den where we've been conducting the interview is empty. My injured hand aches, alternately burning and numb. The bandage is bloody and the sun is lower in the sky. 2 hours have passed. Hello, I call. Scrape. Down beside the wooden wheelchair, toothless, Margaret crouches, knees wide to reveal girdle-tight medical support socks and a thatch of gray pubic hair. I don't know what she's doing at first. I only get the same feeling as when I saw Ezra in the basement, that she's not a person, that something hard and unknown has shoved itself inside her skin. Then I realize she's carving something into the hardwood of the floor. Her object of choice is a human tooth. I panic, looking for an exit, and get turned around. Minnie's in the kitchen, drinking iced tea straight from a plastic gallon-sized Lipton jug. Her mouth encircles the entire thing, tongue lunging in and out. When she sees me, her dead expression revives. She puts down the jug and squares her shoulders. Silas Byrne, you dirty girl killer. Nice to see you, but where are my manners? Let me pour you a glass. No, thank you, I'm not thirsty. She wipes crumbs from the shelf top of her jog bra. Did you know they only like to possess people who go outside? So I've been going outside to prove I'm good enough. It's a real catch-22. Take Grammy Books and even your brother, total golems with rings. She can't live like this, I say. Neither can you. Daintily and for show, Minnie dabs her mouth with her sleeve. Isn't it just awful? I really need your help. That's when I notice that the counters are covered with instant bagged food. Pirate's Booty, Cheetos, Pringles, donuts, soda bread, all open, picked over, and riddled with finger holes and saliva-darkened bite marks. I can make some calls, I say. There are services for people like you. Minnie's fingers glisten a slimy yellow from saliva and Entenmann's coffee cake. Let's do it again, JJ. I walk backward into the guest salon where the old woman squats. Her right hand is crawled up, rubbing between her legs. I realize that the exit is just to the side of the old woman and through the servants' hall, but they've shut all the doors. Everything feels closed in and wrong. I couldn't connect with people the way I wanted after my brother had his nervous breakdown. I shut down as a kind of penance for being the one who didn't get sick. Now that he's dead, I feel like he took a piece of me with him. I'm bereft. I'd like it to be the other way around. I'd like to carry his memory with me instead. Do you understand? I want to be whole. I say as if these harpies will understand and take pity. He meant so much to me. Can't you tell me what happened? Minnie comes closer, pucker-faced as Miss Piggy. I'll make you whole. I realize from the raw sensation in my pipes that I've recently ejaculated, and have the most terrifying notion that this woman and I, Minnie Brooks, have been intimate. Show me your strawberry mole, JJ, Minnie says. A memory flashes. A slithering thing climbs inside me. Then I'm leaning over Margaret's dirty bed, Minnie's pliant body beneath me. A crowd of faces watching while Bartok plays. Down on the floor sits the monster Margaret Brooks, dentureless. She's smeared with blood from her cut-up mouth and used it to paint the floor with stick-figure people with giant organs, dicks and holes and worms all around. I can't catch my breath. That Ezra stink, I smell it on these women. I smell it on myself. I turn the knob behind me. A breeze of clean air rushes through and against the back of my neck and wrist. Oh, Jay, I'm so wet. Let's make tiny little worm babies, Minnie cries. I'm out the door. Their howls follow me. Margaret is laughing. Minnie shouting, no, come back. He raped me. Bang, bang, bang. I pound down the stairs, 3 and 4 at a time, panting. By the 3rd floor, a haze settles, and I begin to recast the worst parts. I had a seizure, perhaps, and need medical attention. Or maybe I've got post-traumatic stress from Ezra's death. 2 more flights. Bang, bang, bang. 1 more flight. Almost out. It's almost over. I'm almost free. I'm at the lobby door when a terrible thing happens. A rough, invisible tongue licks my ear. And I sleep next to that woman.
All right, we'll keep this. Emily, do we have time? Okay, great. I'm putting a timer on, so I know when to stop. So a lot of people, a lot of religions have spent a lot of time thinking about what hell is like. And I'm really convinced I know what hell is like, because you'll die and you'll wake up and someone will say, here's your name tag, here's your apron, you're working housewares, and the first break is in 10,000 years. Work is hell. Work is the only thing in your life that people pay you to do because it sucks so bad. I do lots of things in my life I hate. Work is the only one that I get paid for. And when I lived in LA, I never really worked retail, but it was a long time ago, and I temped. And temping is one of those things where you think it's the answer to all your problems. You know, I will temp, and then at night I will work on my screenplay, or at night I will write my novel. And this temping will be temporary. It will be 6 weeks long or 8 weeks long, and then I'll finish this great work of art, and I will be done with temping. But temping only leaves you time to do one thing, which is more temping. It winds up being like crack. The more you do it, the more you have to do it, because temping breaks you. And when I left LA, it was because largely temping had broken me. At the time, it wasn't temping's fault entirely, because I had wrecked my car and I had to take the bus everywhere. And taking the bus in LA is like wearing a large sign around your neck that says, I am a leper. People, you know, I imagine that as I waited at bus stops to go places, parents would drive by and they would point to me with their children and say, see that man? That man, we're lucky he has his pants on today. That man is not allowed to have a car because there's something wrong with him. And for many children, I was the face of failure. Like, when they think of what the worst you can get to is in life, they think of me at those bus stops. So, but the job before the worst job was Tempsations, which was my temping agency, sent me to this company that rented out billboards. You may not know this, it's a complicated industry. When you see a billboard, there's a company like the one I worked for that contacts the property owner, builds a billboard on it, pays them rent, and then sells the billboard space to the advertisers. So it's a really unexciting job. And what I had to do was, this company that did this boring thing had just bought another company that did the same boring thing. And they said, all we need you to do is, we have a 7-digit filing system, and this company we bought they had a 12-digit filing system. The company they bought had a 7-digit filing system, so they just needed me to put a sticker on it that it just added 4 more digits or 5 more digits. You know, it's like 0001, and you know, go on through and make sure it wasn't a duplicate file and that the right address was in the file, and you know, it was everything matched up on the paperwork. It was really easy. And they walked me down this hall, and I said, "How many files did you acquire?" And they said, 18,000. And I said, that's interesting. And they lit me into a room that was full of boxes of files, and I was in that room for 4 months, tearing off the sticker, putting it on, making sure the addresses matched. And I had NPR on the radio, and listening to Mara Liasson as my soul died. And there were only 2 people who did this job with me. One was this guy named Martin, who was a very studious young man with a little bow tie, very serious, and he just said okay as I explained what we were doing, because it didn't take long. And at lunch, he spoke the one sentence I ever heard Martin say. He turned to me and says, "Do you know about the tortures of the Spanish Inquisition?" And I said, "Sure." And then I went back to filing as far away from Martin as I could, and he didn't come back the next day. And Martin was followed by a gentleman named D. Ivory. And D. Ivory was an African-American gentleman, sort of shaped like a barrel with these little Yosemite Sam legs and a shaved head. And D. Ivory loved to talk. NPR went right off when D. Ivory was there. And D. Ivory had just gotten out of prison, and D. Ivory had been a pimp. And now he's a temp, so he's moving in the right direction. And he was also a hairdresser, because he said to me, "Grady, there are 3 things in life a woman wants: a man to take care of her, a big old daddy dick, and a really fine hairdo." And I said, D. Ivory was the full package. He could do their hair. He had a monster-sized penis, according to him. And, you know, he liked to look after women. So he was everything. And he would regale me with these stories, like nonstop, that always involved the deployment of his penis and just these insane consumption of drugs. And they would end with someone losing, like, a finger, or going out a window, or getting hit by a bus. And then he'd always say, "But now that I found Jesus Christ, I don't do that nonsense anymore." And DeIvory lasted 3 days, and then he never came back again, and it was just me, and I turned off NPR, and I just worked in silence. And after my 4 months there, Temptations, I quit, I put the last thing on, and there was no fanfare, and Temptations was so happy with me. They said, we want to send you to help us out. It's a 2-week job with a problem client, and I should have run. And I didn't, and I said, okay. And that's how I wound up standing in front of a building in downtown LA that had a plywood sign on it that said Mendelsohn and Associates, and you could still see the letters that had been written down before when it was called Casa Lingerie. And I went in, and I reported to Robin, and Robin was very upbeat for a woman who was carrying on an oxygen tank and had to sit down every minute or two because she was running short of breath. And she told me, we're so excited to have you here. This run up to Mother's Day, we need a lot of help. And there were a lot of temps there. I was like one of 15, so I didn't know quite, because the more temps you have, the worse, the more trouble you're in. Because it takes, say 1 temp to answer the phone and make coffee. It takes 20 temps to strip asbestos out of a warehouse and pack it in barrels. So there were a lot of temps here. And they said, and Robin said, we're running up to Mother's Day. We do big business in mother's rings. We sell jewelry alternatives. We sell sweetheart bracelets and white gold and and wedding rings to places like Sears and Mervyn's and JCPenney. And part of me thought, oh my God, people buy wedding rings at JCPenney's. And part of me realized that I was one of those people now. I was a temp. And if I stayed as a temp, I was selling things to myself, basically. So I went in and I sat down and we sold everything. They called it fine jewelry. And if jewelry has to remind you it's fine, it's not jewelry. Everything was a lie. We sold Alaska black diamonds. There's no such thing. We sold Black Hills rubies. There's no such thing. We sold something called Beach Moonstone, which was quartz, or Arkansas diamonds, which was also quartz, or crystalline emeralds, which was quartz as well. And I had a headset. They sat me down. I shared a desk with this woman named Lydia. She was my mentor, which was not a half man, half bull that lived in a maze, but was a horrible, horrible woman with swollen eyes, when I saw her on her break, she would go in the back, right by the loading dock, and smoke and flicker cigarettes at the homeless people who were on the other side of the chain link fence. And someone said to her once, Lydia, you shouldn't do that, you're burning them. And she said, on my way to my car, they asked me if I've got a cigarette, so I'm just making it easier for them. Lydia was not a nice woman. And I should have known that when I sat down, because the first thing I said, hi, I'm Grady, nice to meet you. And she said, oh, hi, princess. I'm sorry we interrupted your tea time. And I thought, oh, okay. And I got this headset that had been Radio Shack from maybe the 70s, just encrusted with earwax. And I thought about scraping it out, but I didn't know how much earwax was in there, and what if I disturbed it, and it just kept, so I just kept it. And I got on the phone, and I started selling these fake rings. And there was no talking. You couldn't talk except if Lydia wanted to talk to me. You couldn't read. You just sat there staring, waiting for your phone to ring with an order, or once an hour you had 5 calls to make. And you couldn't doodle, because they would check your pad for doodles. And they were doing an internal audit. And I actually watched them. They walked around and they fired 2 people while I was there. One was a temp, and who cares about that? And one was this old man in a sweater vest who's probably in his early 60s, sitting at the next desk. And when they fired him, I assume they fired him, they leaned over and whispered in his ear, and he gripped the edge of his desk and said, please don't send me home again. And they whispered in his ear again, then they got security and they took him, and he left his lunch on the desk, and I just watched that all day. And on the other ear, I had Lydia, every time I got on the phone, saying, oh, listen to her talk like a little girl. Look how she holds her pen, just like a sweetheart. And so, and I kept saying to myself, I need the 56 hours. I'm getting, I need the money. I'm gonna tough it out. And you cut a choice. If you wanted a drink from the Coke machine, it was on another floor, you go to Robin's desk and you'd put your money down and a note with what you wanted, and then 2 alternatives if they were out of that. And then you hoped they brought you back your money or your Coke. But you did get a 20-minute lunch break and a 10-minute break, or you can combine them into one 30-minute break. And so I took my 30-minute break and I went to make a microwave burrito, and I was watching it, and the break room was on the loading dock, and there was a microwave on a card table, and there was a chair with 3 legs, and someone had duct taped a broomstick to make a 3rd leg. And the nice, convenient thing about this was that if you wanted to see who was using the men's room, because there was only a urinal and a single stall, you could just turn your head. If your microwave, because they removed the door of the men's room because Robin had pointed out to me people were getting up to monkey business. And I didn't know what monkey business was. It was probably people smiling or something. But so I'm at there and I realize I need to go to the bathroom and I'm not getting another break. And so I look and, and there's someone in the stall but no one at the urinal, and I go. I'm using it, and I'm really, sometimes you feel sorry for yourself and you're just a whiner, but I really felt sorry for myself. And at that moment, and I'm urinating at the urinal, and this voice from the gentleman in the stall says, "Is that Grady?" And I thought, what? DeIvory? And he said, "How's it going out there?" And I thought, what? Urinating? Fine, thank you, DeIvory. And he said, "You know what, Grady? I'm glad to hear you're here. I love it here. You're gonna love it here too. God has a plan for you, and part of his plan is for you to be here now. I think you're moving in the right direction." And I thought, oh, okay. And then DeIvory said, "You know what, Grady? They don't make commodes for big dick gentlemen like myself. It is uncomfortable. The next time I go in here, I need someone in here to hold my big old daddy dick up off the floor. And the problem with talking to someone while you're urinating is you can't run until you're done." And so I finished, and he's still talking about how uncomfortable and what a crime it is. This toilet's so uncomfortable because of his anatomy. And I leave, and as I'm walking back to my desk, this man grabs me by the shoulder, and he says, "Who are you and what are you doing?" And I realized this is one of the people who's been going around auditing people. And I said, I'm Grady, nice to meet you. I'm going back to my desk to finish my calls. And he says, "No, you're not." And it was a very existential moment. I was like, "I'm not Grady?" And he said, "That's my desk. I own this place. That's my desk, that's my phone, you're making my calls." I said, "Sure." And he said, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm Grady," because I assumed that part was correct. And I said, "And I'm going to your desk to use your phone to make your calls." And he said, "I know you. I've been watching you all day. And you know what? I like you." And we've called temp stations and asked them a lot of these people here, they're going. After Mother's Day, they're going. We crumple them up like the trash. But we want you to stay on for another 6 weeks. And I said, the word that got me in so much trouble, I said, "Okay." And I went and I sat down at my desk, and Lydia said, "Oh, look how he sits, like he's wearing a little skirt and blouse." And after it was done, I've never felt so dead inside. And I went to the payphone because I didn't have a cell phone. And I called temp stations. I said, "You guys have got to get me out of here. I can't do this job." And they've just put me on for an extra 6 weeks. And they said, "Dude, they go right through temps." And I said, "I can tell you why. I've got a few guesses." And they said, "You've got to stay. You've got to help us out. Please, if you don't do this, you're no longer working for us." And I thought about that. And this was my job. I had been in a pilot for a Shaquille O'Neal beach workout video that did not get picked up. And I had played a scared tourist in Mighty Joe Young. And this was it for money. And so I said, "Okay." And as I hung up the phone, I felt someone tap my shoulder behind me and say, "Hey, man." And I turned around as one does instinctively, and there was a guy standing there. And he was not wearing a shirt, and he didn't have the body to pull that off. And but it was hot, so okay, no shirt, cool. And he was smiling, big smile, and usually that's a sign that I can trust and I like this person, but that fact was totally ruined because his gums were bleeding. So there was blood running all over his teeth and kind of dribbling down his edges of his mouth. And he said, "Smile, brother." And as he talked, saliva and blood was misting out of his mouth onto the front of my shirt. And I was just too broken to run. And he said, "You know what? Jesus loves you." And I thought to myself, no, Jesus hates me. And I know Jesus hates me because I have a job. Thank you. So I just want to thank these guys for coming out tonight and remind you guys, Ellen Datlow's book, it's an anthology called Carnival Nightmares. Nightmare Carnival, about insanely horrible things that happen in carnivals, which is everything, is on sale. John's House of Windows, which is his haunted house book, is on sale. JT's Rise of Aurora West, and Laird Barron's short story collection, which has the greatest title of any short story collection ever, The Beautiful Thing That Awaits Us All. They're all available back there. These guys will sign. Ellen will sign in blood.
And some of the stories, some of the writers are here who are in the book.
Yes. So please give it up for these guys again for coming out tonight. Thank you guys.